This one is budgets. In the last few years, you've probably seen a lot of emphasis on these budgets. We're trying to make them really good and really right so that they become a real important document for you all that you can use as a roadmap. One of the things that's going to happen here in the next couple of years, it could be this year, it just depends on how well things roll out, is that along with our monitoring that we do normally, we're going to start monitoring your expenditures based on your budgets, based on your time. And so you're going to get, you've been giving us, what your expected spend through on your numbers. And so, and this is not something nobody woke up and thought, man, this would be a great idea to torment people with, right? Is to make you do this. But what HUD's come back to us and said, is like, we want to know every 90 days how much you're going to spend, not just how much you budgeted, but how much is actually, how much you're going to spend, and then tell us how much did you really spend. And so we know that that's not something we can impose, in one sitting. And so we're trying to put it in a little bit at a time. And in our applications in the last couple of years, you've added the, what is your anticipated spend through, right? And that's going to, the needs for that is going to increase here in the next couple of years, where we're actually going to be tracking it. We're going to have a system that tracks it. It's a new system. You heard about talked earlier about the grants management system that we actually got to give them some information on this year. But one of the things that it's going to do for us is going to tell us, based on your RFFs you've put in and the tracking data that you've given us at the application stage, how far off you are. And this is going to help us with this situation that we've had where we approved a grant 5 years ago. There's been no activity on it, and then we get an email saying, hey, can we extend this grant? And we kind of lost track of it ourselves because there was no spending, because that's really how we track our grants, is how much we spend on them. So anyway, this is going to help us with that. But it will put a little bit heavier lift on you all, because they're going to find out if it's not tracking in the spending that you anticipated, then how do we get back on track? Or are these funds that we need to deobligate and redeploy and have you come back in a different year when you're closer to breaking ground and stuff. So. All right, so that's my intro to the budgets. We'll get into the meat here now. So your budgets are the financial representation of the project. It's a plan that's expressed in financial terms, and it's supposed to show as a guideline to help decision making and also to keep track of the project and make sure that it's going to come in on time and on budget. We use budgets for two main things: decision making and monitoring and controlling. Budgets are required and not optional, and since they're planning documents, they have to accurately anticipate the project and the interplay between the program and physical activity. And that's our nice way of saying that you can't sandbag, which means you think that it's going to cost you $1 million, you can't put in for $1.2 million. So we want it to be really, really close, so that, because again, what we're doing is we're funding projects through the whole state of Missouri. And so whatever money that we don't spend on your project, we can give to somebody else to do another project. So we're just trying to make it as equitable as we can. You're required to submit the cost summary, or what will end up hopefully being the approved budget. Once it's been completed, any updates must be submitted to us for approval and inclusion in the grant agreement or the amendments as we talked about, and includes any other sources of funding or changes identified costs for the project. So. We talked earlier too about that not just do we need the budget in totality, but we need to make sure that we have the proper lines of costs and eligible activities. And so we're really gotten really picky about making sure that you you don't have just one line that says construction, that you've got multiple lines that construction, inspection, design, administration, legal, other professional services. All those are broken out so that we can monitor those. You have to have procedures in place or systems in place so that you can monitor the costs that you actually are doing against the budget. And again, we're not going to reimburse any costs that come in that are not in the budget. Now, typically what we do is we will kick it back and have you do an amendment. We won't give you any more money for that, but you can take money from one line and we can put it in another line. And we've been pretty flexible about that because, again, our job, or our posture is to get the projects done and complete. As long as they're related to the project that we funded, then we're excited about just getting it done and getting it out there. So it may seem like a formality, but the other thing to remember is that we are kind of taking a defensive view of how we do our projects, and so we're thinking, okay, if this got audited in 3 years after it's completed, and none of us are around to answer questions, do we have everything in the file that's going to, get through the audit and keep us from having to pay money back? So this is one of the postures too that we're looking at, is making sure we've got enough that tells a story of your project from start to finish. Again, if we get an RFF that does not have a budget line in it, then we're going to ask you to add the budget line. Let me go back though for a second. One thing that's happened, what we used to do when we got in an RFF, or even if we got in a cost summary at the beginning and there was something wrong with it, we would just kick it back to you. And then what we found is that in some cases it would be a minor thing. Let's just say that a cap was busted. So you can only spend $1,000 on admin, and you spent $1,001. And in the past, we would just kick that back to you and make you change that dollar. But what we've done forward is we said, well, maybe since we know we're going to fund this total amount, maybe it's $500,000, would it be better to send that back for the dollar, or should Joe take that dollar and move it into construction, and your admin is less on your approved budget, but your total is the same, right? But then that movement back and forward of this going back to you and back to us is eliminated. And we all knew what the answer was going to be before we started, and we knew what the answer was going to be when it ended. So is it better for us to make minor adjustments in the budget and put it on the cost summary that you sign in the FAGA, or should we just kick that back and then go through this back and forth? Well, we decided what we would do is we're going to make those minor adjustments on your budget, on your cost summary, and then whenever you get the FAGA that has the cost summary approved budget in it, it's going to be different than what you had. The total amount will be the same, but if you were over a cap in administration or in engineering, then that money was going to be moved out of those lines and into your construction. So what happens is you get the same amount of money. We have set our cap, and you're not going to exceed the cap. But then we get rid of this back and forth that, was pretty much irritating. And quite frankly, in some cases, things got lost in between, right? And so sometimes we're waiting for something to come back, and it never came back. And so we felt like this was a customer service issue that we needed to move forward with. And that's why, when you get some of your grant agreements back, they're a little bit different. 99.9% of the time when that happens, if you look at your cap, the original amount busted the cap, and that dollar amount that was different then was just moved into construction. So we felt like that was for you guys, and hopefully you can appreciate that as we go forward. This is a listing of the eligible activities. It's too small to see, but we have them on our website. We also have them on the admin manual. And, you know, occasionally we'll have a cost summary that comes in with an application that the eligible activity is not really stated and it's not clear to us what it should be, and we'll go back to and ask for it. But if you're doing a water project and you have a different description in the cost summary, then we'll probably just change that to water, or we'll call you and ask us what you really meant. And the reason why this is important is because this is really what we report to HUD in our systems. And it goes in by these numbers that are attributed with these eligible activities. And so, you know, that's what drives these particular ones, and that's why it is the list that it is. And the list in disaster and mitigation is different than the list in annual and CB. And so generally, when you're using DR and mitigation, the code numbers are 3 digits, and then in IDIS, the code number is 2 digits. So those are changed. So we've had some questions when we've done that in the past. I just want to make sure you all understand that. So. The per pars. So the thing that we do when we get your application, and probably the first time that you get an application kicked back, it's kickback from us, is we try to match the request for CDBG funds in the application with the one in the cost summary and the number in the per par, and they all three have to match. And so you will get those kicked back to you, because sometimes the engineers have to redo theirs, but that's what we're doing with these. Again, the costs have to be directly related to the specific grant that we're applying for or that we're going to get funded. You can't have, you know, a series of grants and everybody needs a little bit of something, so we're going to put one here and one there. You can't do that with federal funds. They've all got to be directly related to the grant that you're applying for. So, reimbursement should be submitted on a monthly basis on our RFF. They have to include receipts and registers and all that. It can come more quickly than a month, but again, you got to think about, you know, what's the right cadence for the work that's being done. One thing we don't want to do is, and we've seen this in construction projects, is that we'll get bills, you know, that are 6 months old because the construction company didn't bill you, and then you didn't put an RFF, and then it runs down. So the costs in general have to be concurrent. I can tell you from working in research accounting that if you had an invoice that was over 6 months old, that they would tell us to not pay it, because we couldn't really determine at that point whether that cost was a good cost for the grant, or, you know, if it was useful for the grant. And so we want those to kind of trickle in as much as possible. Our folks are glad to process them, so we don't want one every week, but at least once a month. And if it's every other week, you know, then we can also handle that. We talked about the maximum award costs, engineering extension, architect fees, cultural resource surveys, land surveying, and admin. Now we're past that point where we had 2 charts. We used to have 2 charts. One was for June 16th of 2021, and then it was after that 2021. So anyway, we're down to the 1 chart now. And many of you have seen that we've got a spreadsheet that kind of calculates this stuff out. Whenever you propose, if there's a big difference, the spreadsheet calculates what it really needs to be, and we send it back to you, and then you can fix it for us in the next iteration. This is the new engineering chart. The good thing about this one is it goes up to 10 million, because the other one, I think it only made it to $1 million, and so we had a lot of projects that didn't, that topped out at whatever that rate was. Inspection is always 75% of design. The architect fees, if you have those, are 10% of the construction costs. And these are caps that I'm talking about, by the way, make sure. Cultural resource survey, 5,000. Land survey in 5,000. Administration, touchy subject, admittedly. And I think I talked to your group, to one of your groups earlier. You know, we had a meeting with HUD recently, and there were several of us there, and we all hit, and they said, what can we do better? What can we do to improve the program? And the first thing that everybody brought up was we need more administration because, you know, in our case, we get 3%. We have some of our awards that get 1%. Some don't get any. Some get 5%. And so we need it standardized, and we also need it more than the 3%, because the 3% we have to share with you. So 3% is what we use to run our office, plus whatever you guys use within your awards. And so it's really pretty thin, and it makes it really difficult. So I can tell you that they did not like that, and it didn't go anywhere, but we're fighting for it as well as fighting for it for you guys too. So. And this is a chart of the admin costs for each different type of award that we currently have out there. And this is on our website and also in the admin manual. Demolition inspection is limited to $425 per unit. When you have an amendment, the amendment has to be directly related to charges for the award that you are working on, and not, you know, a group of awards. And when we look at amendments, we make sure that the original scope hasn't been busted. And sometimes that's a discussion because we look at it and we say, well, they wanted to do, you know, 1 mile of road, and the contractor came in with less cost, and so that we could do 2 miles of road. And is that an increase of scope? Is that a change of scope? Or, well, they wanted to do this road, we came in a little light, but can we do this road? So, you know, generally, if you're expanding the same road, we're going to say that there's no change in scope. But if you're doing a different road, then we're going to say that that's probably a change in scope. So, it doesn't mean that we won't approve it necessarily, because it has to do with a lot of different factors, like how much money do we have, how much time is left, is this something that they should have caught in the original proposal, and it was an afterthought, or is this something that really has to be done, that type of deal. So there's a lot of factors that go into it, so there's no way to really say up front, here's a good way to look at it, but just make sure from an amendment perspective that you're looking hard at, like, is this part of the original scope, or does this change it? Because that's kind of one of the key factors we use when we're looking at approving those. And this goes into what I just talked about as far as changing the scope. The other option is to deobligate funds, and we redeploy them. We have some situations where if we have money in a subsequent year, it's a project that can be done, like an annual project that we could push forward to a different year. We might say, let's deobligate in this old year and let somebody who can get this project done quickly have that money, and then let's move this one up to this other year where they have several years to get going. So we're playing the game of trying, like it's like a jigsaw puzzle of where can we fit projects and how can they, you know, are these going to be done quickly? That's why sometimes your folks will get a call that says, you know, are you guys ready to go, or how long will this project take? Because we're trying to figure out, you know, we've got funds right now, they're going to expire in 26 and 27, so that we have things that we can slide in there and make happen really quick. Because our posture right now is to get funds out to the street and get projects done. So we're not looking to pull back anything. We're trying to get some of this work done out in the states. And we covered this earlier, but to do a grant amendment, you've got to put in a FAGR. Remember that if you're going to ask for more funds, you've got to turn in a current income statement and balance sheet. I'm going to go through that in a little bit when we talk about the financial management, but we do this, what we call an excess cash calculation. And as folks have said before, we're the funder of last resort, we got financing. And so if folks have the money to do a project, but just don't want to let go of that, versus a community that is really shy on funding, then we're going to want to fund those folks that don't have any resources first, rather than the folks that do have resources. And that's why we do that calculation. But I'll talk about that at length in a little bit. Amendment, I think we covered this, which is it has to be necessary for the project to be completed. It's not a change of scope. Costs are reasonable, allowable, and allocable to the project. And we may ask for certification from you all that the project costs cannot be reduced, or there's no other sources for the funding. I'm going to reiterate too that we can't just take like an email for a request or a letter request for an amendment. Those are good to attach to it, but we have to have our form, and the form's got to be signed. And that goes to some of our internal controls, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But part of internal controls is standardizing processes, standardizing forms. And so we've standardized that form so that that's part of our internal control. And I'm a little bit fast on the last one, but yes, we need the income statement and balance sheet for the excess cash calculation. So cost sharing or leverage, the difference, the way that we look at it is cost sharing is money that the folks that we're in contract with are contributing. So if you're in the agreement, then you're cost sharing. But if you've got an external agency like FEMA or SEMA or Natural Resources, whoever, that we don't have in the agreement, they might be on the cost summary, but they're not in the actual agreement. We don't have any contractual relationship with them. We do consider that leverage. And we look at that in two different ways, because it has to do with the match calculation we talked about earlier, which we have to keep that percentage. And then we also look at it from a standpoint of how much is a total project and who all's involved with it. So. When it comes to use it or to match, then there's an expectation that the match that you're going to be using or the municipality is going to be using is coming from general revenue, not from another federal award. If it is coming from another federal award, then we have to make sure that it's allowable to be matched on other federal money. Again, our leverage is someone who's not part of our contracts. So why this is important is because match funds have to be allowable as a allowable cost or a direct cost in the award. And so what we want to make sure is that you're not in a situation where you're contributing funds, but those funds or you're counting funds as match, but they wouldn't be considered as an allowable cost if it was just paid for the grant. And in that case, they can't be matched. And I think I talked about this earlier, but I want to talk about it again, because the advertising thing, which we have to say 3 times, right? But we did have an agreement this year where the leverage organization, which I think was FEMA, had come back and said that the costs above a certain amount were not allowable. They weren't allowable for them to be charged, and so they weren't allowable as a direct cost. And so the municipality couldn't use those funds as match, which they wanted to do because they ended up having to pay back, a significant amount of money on the grant because that match percent was off. And so it's really important that we keep track and make sure that by definition, whatever you put in as cost share can be cost shared. So it's gonna be verifiable in your records. It's not contributed as another federal award, meaning you're not double dipping. It's necessary and reasonable for the accomplishment of the program. It's allowable under allowable cost rules. It's not paid on another award unless it's allowed to be cost shared. It's in the approved budget and conforms to other parts of the circular. So anyway, that's something that was new that came up this year, but we have a concern because we have a number of awards that have these leverage funds that could cause us grief like that. So, anybody have any questions about that? Because this match thing can get really funky.
On like cases with wastewater projects, because you mentioned the difference between match and leverage. So like DNR and USDA, they can have loan funds and they can have grant funds. So are you counting loan funds as match? Because ultimately that's going to have to get paid back. And then the grant funds as that go under other state and federal, and that's counted as leverage?
Correct. Loan funds that the organization, that the municipality takes out, that they are responsible for, can be considered as match. But grant funds are leverage. Or it may not even be, it would be grant funds.
So do these different organizations leverage you all? Do you have different allowable costs that could be considered match? Like you allow an in-kind for this to be matched, they don't? I mean, is that where you're coming?
Somewhat. Now, in-kind is kind of different because in-kind really won't be considered as match because it's not directly paid, right? But as a whole, the differences between what is allowable for match and allowable for, or not allowable for match, shouldn't be all that difference because it's all driven out of the same regulation, out of CDBG 200.
So how did that happen then, that it was considered a match for your all's program?
Oh, it wasn't. They deemed it to be, so they're a federal agency also. And the cost that they determined, they set what the total cost of the project was, which ended up being less than what the budget was for. And so the municipality came back and said, well, wait a minute, we have extra costs that we paid for this. But the other agency, FEMA, said, no, this is the project, the things that are related directly to this project was here. And so there wasn't any way to get that number above what they had determined that this was the cost of that project. So they were kind of trying to expand the cost of the project to get extra funds in there so their dollar amount matched. But those costs above the actual cost of the grant had been deemed by FEMA was not allowable.
Just to help me understand the cost sharing, like when you're saying CDBG cost share for projects. So if it's, let's say it's an EDA project, like an industrial grant, and then there's EDA funds that are supporting that project as well. And it requires a match. So CDBG, is CDBG considered cost sharing for those federal dollars?
As long as the other agency allows our funds to be matched, then yes. But if the other agency says you can't use any other federal money to match, then we would not be allowed.
Do we know which agencies those are? Is it like, I mean, generally it's EPA and
Yeah, it's generally, if there's an exclusion, it's going to be in the terms and conditions of the agreement.
with that.
Yes. Not our agreement, because we're going to do the deal. Once we've decided to do it, we're going to do it. But they might have a prohibition that we don't know about. But that's up to them. Saw some over here. No? Okay. All right. Match always gets everybody every year, so I want to make sure we stop and talk about that. And think Blair covered this, but we really encourage you all to do the match. And in our policy, it says you got to do match dollar for dollar, $1 of actual cost, $1 match. And this is because we've run up on so many awards that we get to the end of the award and they didn't make their match. And then we got to back down to that percent and get the difference paid back. Because once we set that percent in the agreement, then that's what we're looking for at the end too. And again, we can, in some cases, make amendments on that, but we won't make amendments on it after the grant's done and everything's paid out. So you've got to really look at that as we go along, and if there's going to be a problem, the best time to talk about it is early, not late. We do have some subrecipients that pay the match first, so that it's done and out of the way, and then, it's not a problem, so we encourage that also, if you can. And this just talks about the ratio. This is what we set the ratio at the original budget, and that's the one that we stick with all the way through. And again, this is not driven by us. This is the way the rules fall out in 2 CFR 200, and this is also how it gets audited, way down the road if it gets audited. There may be some situations where awarded funds are required to be repaid. It's unallowable costs are found at the grant closeout. The completed project does not meet a national objective, or if HUD requires a repayment from us for something in one of your awards, then we're going to come and require repayment from you to us. So we don't have any extra funding in our budgets. As a matter of fact, CDBG doesn't have any general revenue funding. We're completely all federal, so there's no extra money to absorb repayment costs.
All right, that's the end.